First Nations leaders said today there has been little progress on more than 200 recommendations made in the final report on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. That report came out 5 years ago today. This morning, the chief of the Assembly of First Nations said only a tiny fraction of the inquiry's recommendations have been implemented.
Regrettably, the report's findings indicate that only 2 of the calls for justice impacting First Nations have been fully implemented over the past 5 years. With the majority showing minimal to no progress, this failure is not acceptable to our people. I hope it is not acceptable to other Canadians either. Today, we are calling upon all governments to increase resources and recommit to these calls for justice. We need you. To the provinces, to the feds, we need you.
The commissioners who led the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls inquiry also expressed disappointment today. They say there has been little systemic change across the country in the last 5 years. They're urging the government to speed up work on implementing their recommendations. So let's stay on this. We've reached Pam Palmater. She is a Mi'kmaq lawyer and the chair in Indigenous governance at Toronto Metropolitan University, and we've reached her in Toronto. Pam, appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
So 5 years since the final report on the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. We just heard from the National Chief, 2 out of 237, I believe it is, recommendations, more than 200. That's it. What's going through your mind right now?
Well, this literally makes the point, the entire point of the National Inquiry into Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls, where they found that Indigenous women and girls are the lowest priority. They're supported the least. They're treated as if their human rights don't matter. And so the silence from the federal government in this intervening time and the failure to implement even a good chunk of these recommendations just makes the whole point. And we need them to do better. We know they have lots of things on their plate, but we're talking about life and death. We're talking about a national crisis, and we know the conclusion of the report was an ongoing genocide. We need to act.
So when you say we need to act, they need to do more. What is it specifically that you think they should tackle immediately?
Well, there's a whole bunch of recommendations on a wide variety of things, but my priority is life and death. And quality of life. So housing is absolutely critical. Everything from shelters to transitional housing to permanent housing for Indigenous women and their children. I also think that anything related to health, what's keeping Indigenous women and their children alive. We know all of the reports that say there's so much racism in hospitals and clinics where they don't even treat Indigenous women, or it's not even accessible. They live in the remote north and there's no medical facilities. These are life and death things. Water. We know the federal government has acted on some of the water issues, but certainly not all the long term, not all the short term, and they haven't even counted all of the houses that don't have running water. So we're talking about things like that and protections. Why have we not criminalized forced and coerced sterilizations against Indigenous women and girls? There's multiple class actions happening right now. This isn't something from 200 years ago. This is still happening. So it's these really critical life and death things that they should have made an absolute priority.
Why do you think they have not done that?
Oh, my goodness. Why don't I? Because I think the majority of politicians want to talk about what they consider big ticket items, international relations, economic development, pipelines, all of the things that focus on their electorate and not necessarily what is a public health and safety issue, which this is. When we're talking about thousands of Indigenous women and girls who've gone murdered and missing already, that doesn't take into account those that experience severe violence, the majority of which is coming not from their communities, but from Canadian society, from organizations and institutes like correctional officers, police officers, and we haven't done anything on that front to prevent violence and murders from happening. And that, like I said, that's life and death. And so I consider that a bigger priority than all the political big ticket items and the focus on elections that they have.
So you say there's not the political will, but is there not well, you tell me, is there not supportive sentiment in Canadian society generally for some implementations of some of these very basic, as you say, life and death recommendations?
And that's the disconnect. I mean, you literally hit on the disconnect because you've got politicians who are focused on what they consider their electoral issues, and you have Canadians saying, hey, wait, we care about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action. We care about the National Inquiry calls for justice. We care about the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples recommendations. Why are you not acting on these? And it's because Canadians push that we've been able to make it this far already. And so I really think that they need to care more about elections. But even if they're focused on elections, they're missing out on the large number of Canadians who care about this and who are stepping up to take their own actions, to advocate, to find ways to support Indigenous women and girls in ways that sometimes even the national Indigenous organizations don't do. And so it's left to the grassroots Indigenous women and girls. And we need a lot of support on that front.
Pam, appreciate your time again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's Pam Palmater in Toronto.